Care from Eurecat. I'm here for presenting the last panel of today of the Cassandra Conference. This is the panel 4 on climate change and migration. And as I stated at the panelists or at the information, we are about to speak or to talk about how climate change it's provoking, it's having consequences on populations, and especially on the migration processes, and how this affects not only people from internal level or the perspective of the rural and urban, but also on how regional population shifts or how international migrations affects states, communities, and regions. And here with me today, there are three experts, sorry. One of them is IRINA CALANCEA as European Innovation Officer at Veolia. She's also a member of Water Europe, and she has expertise on climate change and especially how this impacts on water and human activities. Also, we have CHRISTOPH DEUSTER. He's currently project officer at the JRC, at the Joint Research Center, at the Unit on Demography and Migration. Previously, he also worked at the United Nations on the Population Division, and his focus and knowledge is on population economics, international migration, and climate change. And last but not least, we have VALENTINA BRINIS, advocacy officer at Open Arms. She has also, or previously has been member of the integration expert at the United Nations, and she is currently working with asylum seekers and refugees. So thank you, the three of you, for being here today. And let's just begin. One of the questions that arises due to this topic is how or which are the thank you about that. Previously, and before jumping to the questions, we have to go for the videos. Probably just in a couple of seconds they are about to begin.
Good afternoon, my name is Eurecat CALANCEA and I work for Veolia as an Europe Innovation Officer. And here are my thoughts about the climate change and migration topic. So extreme weather, rising temperatures and damaged ecosystems are threatening the lives of millions of climate refugees. This climate migration is expected to surge in coming decades, predicting that 1.2 billion people could be displaced globally by 2050, Africa and South Asia being the most vulnerable regions. Climate migration is a very complex issue, often perceived as a potential threat due to a combination of economic, social, and political factors that can exacerbate tensions. Climate migration could also strain political stability, especially in host regions, that may lead to restrictive immigration policies, which can trigger political polarization. Some governments may view climate migration as a national security concern. In my opinion, governments and countries need to plan for a more sustainable migration agenda, but the problem often is that politicians are more interested in short-term elections and in spreading out an anti-immigrant propaganda, mostly promoted by radical right parties. Across Europe, far-right leaders are taking power and they may use fear of migration to advance their agendas, which can lead to the adoption of restrictive policies. Such manipulation can deepen divisions within society and undermine social cohesion. I think that today the fear of migration is driven by perception rather than real, tangible threats. This perception can be shaped by various factors, including stereotypes, misinformation, and political narratives. And it's important to base policy decisions on accurate data and analysis rather than fear-driven perceptions. Policies driven by fear and perception can lead to missed opportunities for economical, cultural, and social growth. Migrants accounted for 47% of the increase in the workforce in the US and 70% in Europe over the past 10 years. Skilled immigrants contribute to boosting research and innovation as well as technological progress. Understanding these impacts is very important in order to counter misinformation and reduce the potential for manipulation by extreme political influences. This requires public education and awareness campaigns that promote more understanding of the issue. Thank you.
We know our climate is changing. Global temperature levels are rising. Environmental and climate-related disasters are frequent and becoming more intense. The scientific community has extensively studied the consequences of climate change for human migration. It has shown that the links between climatic factors and migration are complex. Some scholars suggested that climate change induces large migration flows. Others argue that the effects of climate change reduce or constrain international migration. At the European Commission's Joint Research Centre, we study climate-induced migration since several years. We aim to disentangle some of the complex links between climate change and human migration. Our research indicates that the adverse consequences of climate change can increase or decrease international migration dependent on the context. Our most recent analysis uses rich global survey data that asks people directly about their desires and plans to move to another country. The project links these migration intentions to natural disasters individuals were potentially exposed to. The study shows that climate-related disasters have a different effect on migration intentions in different world regions. In less developed countries, disasters are linked to lower migration intentions. In least developed countries, disasters increase the migration planning activities among those that desire to migrate. By contrast, no effect could be found for more developed countries. These findings suggest that climate-related disasters can affect migration intentions in certain world regions. They remind us of the importance to focus on those populations that are most exposed and vulnerable to climate change. Targeted policies addressing climate-induced migration and displacement, specifically in less developed parts of the world, are highly important.
I'm Valentina BRINIS, the Advocacy Officer of Open Arms, that is a humanitarian NGO based in Spain, in Barcelona, but we are working in the Central Med in order to rescue people that are trying to cross this route in order to get protection or to get a better life in Europe. During these last 8 years, we rescue more than 70,000 people, but we have to remember that this route and this area of the planet during the last 10 years gained the unlucky appellation of graveyard, because more than 30,000 people lost their life trying to cross this route. During our operation, we have the possibility to collect a lot of stories of people that we rescue. And we collect also the story of the dead bodies that we rescue, because thanks to their friends we can rebuild their biography. Now, after 80 years of operation, we can report that the main causes, the main route of the migration is related to the climate change, because a lot of lands are inhospitable, forcing people to leave them. So this phenomenon will increase for sure, and will increase very soon, as the World Bank reported. So I think that the topic of today that I can I can discuss is the relation between migration and migrants' route and the climate change. Thank you.
So thank you, Christoph, Irina, and Valentina for this information and videos. And as I said, or I was previously saying before, one of the questions that arises from all this is how or which are the most significant environmental factors that contribute to this climate-induced migration and how they are expected to evolve in the coming decades. It's up to you now whether Christoph would like to begin, or otherwise I pass the floor.
I'm very happy to start if you want me.
You.
So first of all, good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. So thank you very much for the kind invitation to speak here in this excellent panel this afternoon. So regarding this very interesting question, as usual, there are no easy answers. So we know that climate change has several major dimensions, and what is typically distinguished by the scientific community is the so-called slow onset changes, such as changes in average surface temperatures or the famous sea level rise that is evolving over decades. And on the other hand, the so-called fast onset shocks, such as extreme weather events. So this latter category comprises events such as storms, droughts, floods, extreme temperature waves, heat waves. And it's very challenging generally to establish a causal link between such environmental factors and individual migration responses. So it's difficult to isolate, because of that, the most significant factors. And that's particularly the case if you think about the slow onset changes that are likely to happen over the next decades. So if I think about our own research, thinking about median projections that combine median climate scenarios on different climate models that have been produced by the scientific community on, for example, long-term temperature changes, but also sea level rise. Our results show that climate change will induce voluntary and forced migration or relocation of millions of people. So the numbers are in the tens of millions of people of working age alone over the 21st century. However, when we look at these numbers, what we find is that only a small fraction of these people that are affected and will likely have to relocate because of climate change, only a small fraction of them are suffering from these negative effects, but will manage to move to other countries. So the predominant share, the predominant majority will move within countries. So this typical short distance movement, that's one general finding we can conclude that is predominantly agreed upon, as alluded in my short video, when it comes to migration movements. And to have a somewhat more specific answer, to be a bit more specific when it comes to internal displacement, which describes this displacement of people within country borders due to natural disasters. There are databases produced by the large international organizations that attribute such displacements to natural disasters. So according to the most recent data provided by the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, which is the IDMC, which is one major international organization providing data, it's storms and floods that amounted to the predominant share of internal disaster displacement when it comes to recent years. So these are typically some environmental factors that drive out a lot of people. And regarding the last element of the question, the trends for the coming decades, well, almost all climate models under various scenarios project that global temperature levels will rise in the future. So this is somewhat that evolves from all of these different models. And the long-term effects of climate change are usually correlated with the intensity, but also the frequency of extreme events, such as these natural disasters. And this is potentially something we see already today when we think about the summer month, but something that is omnipresent all over the world. So from what we know nowadays, it can be expected that all types of natural disasters will become even more frequent, but also more intense in the future.
Thank you. And in this regard, maybe Irina, you could also point out what's specifically with regards to the water part of the climate change, or how climate change is affecting the access to clean water, and how this may affect, therefore, this induced migration. What's your view?
Yes, so actually, water scarcity is a real issue today. Sorry, first of all, thank you for inviting me. Just a small parenthesis before, so thank you for inviting me, and thank you for being here. So regarding the water management, actually, water scarcity is one of the consequences of climate change. And the tendency of this phenomenon is supposed to get higher and higher in the next decades because of climate change. And there are many regions which are really exposed to these issues. Mostly in Africa, Southeast Asia, but also in Europe. Like we've seen many episodes within these last years of water scarcity in Spain, for instance, or Israel and other countries. In terms of technology and innovation, Veolia is providing different sustainable management services. So one of the technology that we are using is the reuse. So one successful example is, for instance, in Africa, we have a big plant in the capital of Namibia that by reusing wastewater, Veolia is providing more than, so drinking water enough for more than 400,000 people over there. So this is a real successful example that has to be also replicated in other countries. And this is the tendency right now. And also another thing is that the company Veolia is, we have like the Veolia Foundation, who is also working directly within the refugees camps. When they lack of drinking water, natural resources, we can provide actually pilot units in order to provide with drinking water directly on the field. So even we can see that even in the private sector, there are things that can move and be put in the place in order to let's say to adapt and mitigate the effects of climate change in different regions. Thank you.
And Valentina, an organization such as Open Arms, which in a way it's a first responder to many people struggling in terrible circumstances. What's the experience, or is there already some insights of how this climate change is affecting this population, these people trying to move to a better future even today for themselves? Is this something already being noted?
Good afternoon, and thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure for us as Open Arms, for me as Open Arms, and so for Open Arms to be here with these important speakers. Yes, Open Arms, together with other humanitarian organizations, are working immediately in the field. So for us, it's very important we work as a sort of observatory, because we can collect several stories and several biographies of people that are leaving their countries because of several reasons. But the main root is for sure the climate change. I just want to report here, as I did in the video, I just want to report here the case of Bangladesh people, because I think that at the European level it's very most important to register it. During the last 8 years, we rescued more than 70,000 people in the Central Med with our 2 boats. And during the last year, we rescued more than 500 people from Bangladesh. As everybody knows, Bangladesh is not in the Central Med, is not in a country of the Med, but there are a lot of people that cross these migrant routes. So why they do it, and why they follow this migrant route, and why they land in Europe by boat and not by airplane? I think that when we talk about climate change effect, we have also to consider the possibility of the people to leave their countries, because a lot of people are not considered as refugees when they declare to have climate change problems, when they declare to have environmental issues. So the case of Bangladesh is very, very important, and studying it, we can also understand how the world and how the states are answering to this issue. Bangladesh people travel from Dhaka, the capital of the country, and leave their country by airplane, traveling from there to Egypt, and from Egypt to Libya they move by land with other transports. And when they arrive in Libya, they have any possibility to work or any possibility to be integrated there, because everybody knows the life condition of that country. So they decide to cross the Mediterranean Sea by boat. And in the 2023, but also since the 2022, the Bangladesh nationality is one of the main nationality that we register in the port of disembark in Italy, so in Europe, okay? But it's very useful to see which is the power of their passports. So if we consider their possibility to have access of and to apply for a visa, we can see that they can move freely, so without asking a visa, only in 15 countries. And it is a very low rank if it is compared to an European country. For instance, Italian passport guaranteed to their citizens the possibility to go in 150 countries without visa. So they are forced to move in another way, and to cross the borders in irregular way. And I think it's very important to consider it when we talk about climate change, because when the Bangladesh people arrive in Italy and they apply for asylum because they have any possibility to work here or to have access to other permit to stay. So they apply for asylum, and during the commission, they tell stories related to the climate change. So they don't have the possibility to live in that countries, but at the same time, they don't have the regular possibility to move because their passport is not enough and don't give to them this possibility.
Yes, indeed. And in this regard, we know that climate change doesn't understand about borders. The same happens with migration, whether that be in some sort of a well-known and well-accepted international passport or not. In this regard, I was wondering, which are, or do we know of cross-border collaboration or regional agreements and some sort of local agreements and partnerships that can provide support to the populations affected by climate change? Do we know of successful models that can be emulated in other regions, in other countries, in other municipalities? Oh. Valentina, for instance, okay. Yes, indeed. So, yeah.
Maybe Christoph, before in his speech, touched a very important point on this. So the possibility to improve regional resettlement programs. And at this moment, we don't have this, at European level, we don't have this opportunity, and we cannot guarantee this opportunity to all the population that declare to live to be affected by a climate change situation. So for sure, the regional settlement programs is one of the points that could be considered, and to develop a regional resettlement that allow, in my opinion, that allow for the relocation and integration of climate migrants. At the moment, we don't have so much program all around the world. I was reading just this morning about this program in Australia, because only yesterday they guaranteed to the population of Tuvalu, that is a small island very close to Australia, to move from there to the Australian country, because they don't have the possibility to live in this island because of the rising sea level. And it is just a program, but we could take it as an example to propose in other situation. In general, I think that at European level, but in general, maybe at world level, there is not so the information are not so shared. So we can have it, we can have access to it just reading the newspaper, but there is not a sort of a community able to discuss about this program and about the connection between climate change and climate change population that are affected by it. So another point to touch and to improve could be the information sharing, and in general the capacity building for the population and the advocacy program for the NGOs, for the humanitarian organization to propose program in order to rescue people that are affected by this topic, but in general to provide assistance to them.
Irina, Christoph, I was wondering, maybe from the JRC, it's easier to identify such cross-border policies and recommendations. Are there examples?
So yeah, thank you very much. Just to add to the very important points that have been raised by Valentina previously. So this question on best practices, which I believe personally is highly important. Maybe on that occasion, I have to say that I speak on my personal behalf, my personal capacity. The views I'm expressing do not necessarily reflect the view of my institution, but I had the same feeling that Valentina just mentioned. When I read about this agreement, this bilateral agreement between Australia and Tuvalu, I got quite excited in the sense that it's the first example of a bilateral agreement that offers residency to people in Tuvalu affected by climate change, based on the category of climate change. So the problem we had at the international level so far is there's no convention or standard agreement that defines who actually qualifies as a climate refugee. So in that sense, I also followed the news of this bilateral agreement, which from what I know is one of the first examples that actually pick up this topic of climate migration as a residency category, even though it's, you have to say also that it's at very small scale. I think it refers to 280 people a year, which is a lot for the size of Tuvalu, of course, but not for a country the size of Australia. So in that sense, I share fully what has been said by the previous speaker in the panel. Coming to the topic of regional agreements that can be leveraged. From my point of view, what is interesting to observe since many years is that the international community has increasingly included aspects of climate-related migration into global policies agendas. So we think, for example, about the UN Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration, which has been adopted in 2018, which is the first intergovernmentally agreed document on migration. This also included the topic of climate change as a driver for migration. So in that sense, there are already developments at the international level, but also at the bilateral level, that in policy agendas, this level of climate-induced migration or climate change as a driver of migration are increasingly included. When it comes to the very regional level, in the sense of looking at different world regions, one has to say that the Global Compact was also followed by a so-called regional review process that regularly produces reports on the implementation of the Global Compact in certain regions of the world, be it Latin America or whatever different type of region according to the UN classification. And these reports also contain examples of initiatives at regional level. It would be, I think, a bit beyond the scope to this session to go and name them here specifically. But again, I think it's an interesting development at the global level, at the regional level, at the bilateral level, that increasingly policy agendas. That's something I would like to add to what has been said before regarding this question.
Yes, maybe I will just I would also add just a point to the fact that actually in order to have regional cooperation and international cooperation, we will need more an harmonization of migration policies. So full regional mobility requires this harmonization of national laws, but also regulations with the regionally agreed policies and instruments. I think that it's very controversial, but we can say that on the one hand, the EU may be a successful example because it's an example of regional integration, because we can implement laws through its own institutional systems that must be implemented by member states. But we also have different policies, mechanisms that address migration and asylum with collaborative frameworks for managing migration flows. We also provide humanitarian aid, support integration efforts, but we also see that there are many challenges. We've seen the episodes, the really sad episodes this summer with, I think, Valentina, you know more about this with Lampedusa and all the migrants in the Mediterranean and other regions. So there are good initiatives and good policies, but at the same time, there are also many challenges we need to face. Thanks.
Just to add a point, because yes, as IRINA was telling, it's very important topic because also when we think about Italy or Spain, it's very difficult to define and to get a definition of who is a climate change migrant or who is a refugee because of climate change. So it's very hard. Also, if we see at a local level, it's very important to report that there is not a clear law. So also when we accommodate people that arrive in Lampedusa, now that is in the south of Italy, we are not able to get them a clear definition because they ask for a protection because they are not able to live in their countries, but at the same time they are not able to demonstrate to be inside the Geneva Convention because the Geneva Convention doesn't foresee the presence of the climate change population, no? Climate change refugees, so behavior, these kind of refugees, environmental refugees. So from one side, we have the issue, we have the population that carry out this issue, but on the other hand, we don't have any kind, not any, but we have a very low answer and also at legal level. Sorry, but I just want to add this topic because I think it's another matter.
Yes, and before Irina was talking about technology solutions such as water reuse. And one of the questions that also arises from all these discussions is how innovation, how technologies can contribute not to the stop or the of the change on the climate change, but how they can contribute to the preparedness of communities towards the effects of climate change. Are there examples of best practices or innovations being tested in specific regions, where that be, for instance, in the Mediterranean, that can be used and transported or transbonded into other communities? How can innovation, how can technology help and cope with climate change? Christoph, for instance.
Yes, I think that's another very excellent but broad and interesting question. I have somewhat more of a general level of response. So I think indeed the level of technological adaptation to the adverse consequences of climate change could include a lot of dimensions. So many, many different dimensions. So if you think about the richest countries in the world nowadays, I believe that technology already plays a key role for adaptation. So for me, what comes to my mind immediately are prime examples of these flood control mechanisms installed in some parts of the world. If you think about the Netherlands, for example. In other parts of the world, adjustment of agricultural production through crop switching, that could be another example of an innovative adaptation mechanism assisting local communities. So all this could help communities, from what I believe, in facing climate-induced migration, because it addresses these elements of exposure and vulnerability, which we, as I mentioned in the introductory video, what we need to focus on. While it might be important and possible that technology and innovation will continue playing an important role for adaptation, I think it's also important to remember that also technological solutions are limited. So from my point of view, they might help to some degree, but I would believe that such solutions are also finite. And it's important, I think, to remember that we are dealing with an extreme change of our climate. So the climate is really projected to change dramatically if there's no solution or activity by humans over the next decades. And that's something that is common across all projections produced by climatologists. So I'm wondering whether technology innovation can indeed solve the problems ahead of us, or whether we, at this point, not already need to focus on other solutions in addressing global emission levels beyond just hoping in the technological solution for the future.
I would also add that actually working for new technologies and innovation became an emergency, because the climate is changing really fast, and so the publics, but also mostly the private companies work a lot for new technologies and solutions. So we see that at the European levels there are many programs who are financing research and innovation projects within the environmental sector. So as I've just mentioned, at Veolia we have many different technologies, so water reuse is one of them. In terms of usages, it can be at the domestic level, but also at the industrial level, and also for agriculture. So irrigation solutions and so on. And also, I think there is a lot of work going on. The question is that, there is also these differences between developed countries and developing countries, meaning that in developed countries, governments invest a lot for this kind of research. Now, the question is how to replicate it in most vulnerable regions. And that's why I think one of the really important point is that we need funding also, like the Green Climate Fund or other funds and investments mostly in the most vulnerable regions. Thanks.
So I guess that not only the challenge is to develop technologies and innovations that can address these problematics, but also then there are many other challenges or borders that are putting it difficult to implement such solutions. And one of the things that one of the possibilities that it's always discussed is to incorporate the local knowledge and the community-based knowledge into the implementation of these solutions that are innovative or that are technology available. And I was wondering here, maybe Valentina, whether how can we, as governments or as countries under or more developed countries, how can we make use of this community knowledge in regions or in societies where climate change is affecting already quite severely?
Very,
It's a tough
very
question,
huge
probably.
question.
I put you on the red spot, but
Well,
in
if
order,
I would have an answer, I could be the president of the. No,
no, but
in general, just to connect, just to continue the previous discussion related to the technology, there is also a problem of. So when you improve a technology, you should be sure that the population are aware of it and are able to use it and to adapt it to their countries, because sometimes there are the best technology, the best ideas, but the local population are not able to get in touch with this idea, with this program, and so they are not able to improve it in their territory. So I think that is one of the main challenge is also to share the information also at local level and to improve a community-based approach that that involve the population, and also the head of communities and the local communities. So I think that is a challenge. In general, I think that also by the story that we collect during our missions, there are a lot of people that could live in their countries if they should have the instruments to have a safe house, or they could move to another cities in the same countries, because maybe IRINA before was talking about the internal displacement, but there are countries where the people are not able to migrate inside the country. So I think that one of the main lack when we talk about local population is to improve a community-based approach more than to improve other technologies.
so well, thank you. But that's as I was trying to raise, and maybe it was a tough question. The question being then is how can we incorporate or how can the knowledge from local communities and that they are already suffering the consequences of climate change, how can this bottom-up approach can be used and can be utilized to implement solutions that are not only for that case, but also can be transported, can be used in other regions. Do we know of examples that have been already working in the past in previous projects, in previous communities, that could be used in order to implement technology solutions or innovations? I'm thinking about the previous panel, there was a discussion about loans to specific people that were adapting or were trying to invest within their communities. And so these loans could then be used to purchase technologies or products that could be used in their local cases. Do we have or do we know of other examples where this local knowledge can therefore be used and tested and addressed? Okay, I guess not that much.
I think
I'm sorry.
I can give you just a general overview. So I think that what is important here is that it's true that we need a real collaboration with communities, because with local communities to push the rise of new positive policies and programs for these people who are concerned. So what is important here is really to have a local knowledge and expertise, meaning that I'm thinking also about like the local people, but also indigenous, like respect them and incorporate their knowledge, because I think they really know, they probably know more than us about the environment and about the weather patterns and adaptive practices. So maybe we should listen more to locals in order than for public policies or governments to make like more directives and laws and so on. So really like more collaboration. I would say that this is the one of the things that we need to put in place, and also collaborate with local leaders, but also hear the voices of those who are not really heard, like elders, youth, women. These are the part of population that often are the more impacted by this climate change events, and unfortunately we don't really take them, so their voices, we don't take them into account. I actually thinking now about an example. It was in Niger. So Niger, it's one of the first country in Africa who adopted a law for the protection of climate-induced migration. And what is interesting here is that they really made a huge collaboration between publics, privates, and mostly with like citizens, local communities, women, elders, youth, and they took into account all these different opinions and point of views, and they actually published a new law. So to me, this is a really successful example of how to engage with local communities.
Maybe just to add one last point on that. I mean, I guess we all agree that it's highly important to incorporate local communities in finding solutions. It's just that the problem, if we think about climate-induced migration, is extremely complex. And as I'd mentioned before, it's context-specific. So some of the effects of this climate change that we see in certain parts of the world might have completely different impacts or effects in different parts of the world. So I mean, again, I think we all agree that it's important to incorporate local or regional knowledge into climate migration policies. But I think the best we can do in that sense is to create environments that are inclusive and that ensure that all voices could be heard, especially in these policies agendas. I mean, there are things at the policy level that are happening at the moment, as I mentioned before. So these, from my point of view, these policy shaping environments need to be inclusive. So that's just like one final element to add without giving a very precise example of a good initiative.
Thank you.
Yes, exactly. And the community-based approach is exactly it, because all the actors and all the stakeholders are invited to promote and to shape a common line in order to face a specific issue. In this case, the migrants, the migrants because of the climate change. So I think it's important to improve this kind of program. When I was working in the UN, we adopted this approach, the community-based approach, in all the contexts where we have to arise an issue.
Okay. I see here on the chat for the questions from the people who following the discussion. They are asking of if any of you three are aware of countries that give special visas for climate immigrants. Before Valentina, you mentioned the difficulty of any immigrant to justify the reason for their migration due to climate change. And this question probably it's too specific for any of you, which I guess so. They are also saying that, however, there are already countries that are trying to make changes in this regard. And therefore, do you foresee that in the future, countries are not only going to harmonize policies, immigration policies, as IRINA was saying before, but will we be seeing that climate change is one of the main reasons for migration reasons?
I mean, I could try. As I said before, there's no standard, like at the international level, there's no convention of the term like that defines climate refugee. So it's like not like the term that's defined in certain legal terms in that sense. I personally think if there's one message I would like to send after this session, it's important to incorporate those people that are the most vulnerable and exposed to the consequences of climate change. So these are the people we need to focus on, because there will be people that actually end up in situations of immobility. And that's something that is also studied by the scientific community increasingly. So I've been just this summer at a meeting where the session on immobility, climate immobility, was among the sessions that were most attended. So I think when it comes to certain policies, we need to focus on those communities or those people that are in the most vulnerable positions.
Thank you. There is also another question on the chat. What they are asking is whether the organizations, whether that be, or especially the Joint Research Center, are your organizations somehow evaluating or monitoring the effects of climate change directly into migration processes? Is there an observatory, some sort of international panel that is trying to do this?
I mean, that's sort of the elephant in the room, right? I mean, the attribution of climate change as a driver to international migration, causal links to draw them, is the extreme challenging task. So to say like, okay, a person is migrating internationally because of climate change or the adverse consequences of climate change alone is something that is complicated, because as we know, different drivers of migration are interlinked, and that is, I think, in line what has been said here on the panel before by the other speakers. So that's something that is extremely challenging to say, okay, it's just the one driver of migration, which is climate change or the effects of climate change, that is responsible for XYZ amount of people moving internationally.
Okay. Valentina, I don't know whether this also is something that it's needed in regards with NGOs that are on the field working or trying to help out migrants. Is this sort of information necessary and needed, or this goes maybe a little beyond what's the actual need of these populations?
Collecting these kind of stories because they are very useful for the advocacy activity. So when we go to the institution in order to explain our job and to explain which kind of people we are rescuing, it's very useful to have this kind of information because we can create a link between the climate change and the situation in a specific country and the reason why the people are leaving from their country. But it's not so easy to have a direct link because there are a lot of reasons why the people are leaving their country. So before I was doing the case of I was reporting the case of Bangladesh because very useful, because everybody knows since 20 years that which is the situation in Bangladesh, but the same situation is in a lot of African countries, and it's not useful. It's useful to report it to the institution in order. In fact, in the last European agenda on migration, they report the climate change as one of the main reasons why the people migrate.
Okay, there is also another topic that we did not discuss, and even though there is not that much time left, but the panel, as described in the conference, also tried to relate how extreme political parties and influence affect all the governance process in democratic governance, and how this can impact the policies, I guess, or most significantly in developed countries. Do we foresee an issue where it's tried to relate climate change together with migration in order to change, in order to modify policies at EU level? Is there a link between extreme political parties that make use of climate change and migration policies and deny all these, or not? I know, Christoph, Valentina, if this is something that within the processes of your evaluations and your studies take effect. I guess I'm trying. Maybe I'm mixing myself up. I don't know if I'm clear enough. What I'm trying to ask is whether extreme political influences can make use of migration and can make use of climate change in order to modify public agendas, and therefore not provide an answer to the needs of today, both to populations and both to the environment.
If I may, we see actually the rise of the right parties. So the extreme right parties in Europe, in many countries in Europe, we can see Italy, we can see other countries such as Germany, the UK. So I think this is like this narrative, a very pessimistic narrative about migration, where I think their goal is to get more votes. And this narrative is about the negative effects of migration, but actually we don't need to relate on fear-driven perception. We need to relate on real data and analysis, because migration may have a very positive effect, especially about in the workforce. For instance, so in Europe, migrants represent a really high percentage of workforce. We need to take into account their contribution to the technical development, social development, and need to change this narrative from a negative way. So what we are seeing in the media, in the news every day, and relate to real data and see that there are many positive effects. And so base our perceptions on the real facts. So I think this is very important.
Thank you. Christoph, Valentina, I don't know whether you have anything to add in this regard.
I mean, I'm working for the Journal Research Center, so this call for evidence-based information policies is something that I couldn't copy more. Evidence-based, and that's in line with actually the big global developments I mentioned before. If you think about a global compact for migration, that's exactly objective number one. Having data is something that the global compact calls for. So as has been mentioned by the previous speaker, by IRINA, we shouldn't forget that international migration also has positive effects on countries of origin, transit, but also destination. So especially when it comes to destination countries,
just I think the most recent crisis, the COVID crisis, indicated how important potentially millions of migrant workers can be to sustain the workforce in certain sectors. So this is something that has been also underlined over and over again by institutions such as the United Nations. So that would be my broad point on that.
Thank you. So, well, I guess unless you would like to add something more, we've closed also the questions addressed by the attendees. I would just like then to say thank you to the three of you, also to the people attending and joining us. Hope you enjoyed the discussion and the information. And again, thank you very much for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.